Hey everybody, it's the Sheriff Treefitty and welcome back to another GLC review video. Today we're looking at Temporal Forces, which is about to become legal. Before we get started, I did want to go over a couple notes. I have adjusted my ranking scaling a little bit. So 5 is, there's no reason not to play this. 4 is better sometimes than current options, which means that it is just as good as current options and sometimes can be better. 3 is just as good as current options, so really you could switch this out for something you're currently playing and it probably won't change things. 2 is just too situational, and 1 is you're a meme, where you are just trying to meme, obviously. So there's that. Another point is the last one ran a little bit long, where I went over a bunch of cards, and this time I'm only going to go over some cards that I think are worth mentioning, so this will be a lot shorter. And then at the very end we will go over my opinions of the current rankings of each type for GLC, from best to worst. So let's get into it. First thing I want to talk about is Roselia. I just want to point it out that it has a nice ability that if it is in the active spot and is damaged, then the attacking Pokemon is now poisoned, which I think is just your best option for Roselia if you're playing Roserade. The next one I want to mention is Turtwig, which you might actually not want to play this Turtwig as we talk about an item later in this video. Spoiler alert, but it has an ability where it takes 20 less damage, so this is a really tanky Turtwig, so it might be a solid option. So the first one I want to talk about, which I'm very excited for, is Bramblegast, and I'm a huge fan of Bramblegast, so I'm excited about this card. Bramblegast is a stage 1, has 100 HP, but it has an ability, Resilient Soul, and it gets plus 50 HP for each prize card your opponent has taken. So late game, this card is ridiculous. If your opponent has taken 4 prize cards, then this guy has 300 HP. If they have one prize card remaining, they have 350 HP, or Treefitty for you cultured people. Which is absolutely insane. Slap a luxurious cape on here and it is 450 and nothing is killing this thing. And it has its attack is a coin flip based attack, unfortunately, but it's still pretty good. For 3 energy it does 80, and you flip a coin for each energy attached to this Pokemon, and this attack does 80 for each heads. This is only good, I think, if you are pairing it with Venusaur. So really, for 2 energy, you're flipping 4 coins, and so you're averaging 160, which is great. So I'm gonna put Bramblegast at a 4. I might push it to 5, but really, really solid boost to Grass, in my opinion. A very good late game option. And that's all I have for Grass, so let's talk about Fire. First up, I want to point out Magcargo, and it has an ability whenever your opponent's active Pokemon moves to the bench during their turn, their new active Pokemon is now burned. This is a pretty good ability in a burn kind of deck, but I still think regular versions of Fire are better, so I'm going to give Magcargo a 2, just a little too situational. And I want to point out this Centiskorch, which is kind of in the same boat as Magcargo, where for 2 energy or 1 with Charizard, it does 180, but it doesn't do anything if they're not burnt. So in a burn-based deck, this is a really good option, but it is pretty situational, so I'm also going to give Centiskorch a 2. And that's it for Fire. Let's go to Water, and I know some of you were really excited about this fur alligator. Shout out to Forrest again. Stage 2, 180 HP, has the ability, once during your turn, you may put 5 damage counters on this Pokemon. If you do, during this turn, attacks used by this Pokemon do 120 more damage to the opponent's active Pokemon, which is really nice to push numbers. And then for 2 water, it does 160, and it can't use this attack next turn. But 160 for 2 is very doable. Doing 280 for 2 is ridiculous, very good, but it is on a stage 2. But in a water deck that is not trying to pump a bunch of water energy onto the board, and just tries for more cheaper attackers, this is a pretty solid option, so I'm gonna give it a 3. Going into that same deck is this Frostmoth for 2 energy, does 100. So you're giving up that acceleration from the other Frostmoth, but this does 100, and during your opponent's next turn, the defending Pokemon can attack, which is pretty nice. An annoying thing to get by. 100 is a decent amount of damage. You're doing 120 with a Muscle Band, I guess, but I suppose this is meant to not KO stuff and slow your opponent down. So I'm also going to give Frostmoth a 3, maybe a 2, but I'll give it a 3 for now. And then finally, in that same kind of deck, I have this new Palafin, where 150 HP on a stage 1 is pretty decent, and for 1 energy it does 130, and this Pokemon also does 10 damage to itself for each damage counter on it. So really, the first time you're using this, you probably don't have damage on it, so you're really doing 130 for 1 energy with no drawback, which is pretty great. So I'm going to give this a 3 as well. So just a solid option for this sort of cheap attacker sort of water deck. So next up is Lightning. And first up is this Raichu. Stage 1, 130 HP for 2 energy. It does 50 damage to each Pokemon that has any damage counters on it. That means your Pokemon and your opponent's. But 50 spread is kind of ridiculous, and Lightning has pretty good options for spread, so I think this is very doable. I would not worry about damage on your own Pokemon, really, because Lightning is very squishy, so if Lightning Pokemon get damaged, they're most likely just getting knocked out, so you really don't have to worry about the drawback on your own Pokemon, so I think this is a very solid spread option for Lightning and boosts that archetype greatly. So I'm going to give Raichu a 4. Then we have I wanted to talk about Iron Hands. I'm still trying to talk about all the future and ancient Pokemon, just bringing them up because I know people will want to try and make a future deck work or an ancient deck work, but unfortunately most of them are still pretty bad. Iron Hands, its main attack is for 3 energy, and it's based on EXs and Vs, so it's a 1. It doesn't even apply to GLC. And Iron Thorns, for 2 energy, it does 70. You reveal the top 5 cards of your deck, and it does 70 damage times the amount of future cards you find there. Then you discard the future cards and shuffle the others back into your deck. So this is like there's not enough future decks to warrant this, so I think this is just a 1 as well. And that is it for Lightning. Next up is Psychic, and first up is Bronzong on my list, and it has an interesting attack. For 1 Psychic, does 30, and during your opponent's next turn, they can't play any Pokemon from their hand to evolve their Pokemon. So a pretty solid denial attack to slow your opponent down while you set up. Pretty good. So I'm going to give it a 3. And then I want to talk about Reuncul re this boy. Stage 2, 120 HP, which is pretty dang low for a stage 2, but has this one colorless attack that, look at the top 8 cards of your deck. You may put any number of Pokemon you find there onto your bench and shuffle the other cards back into your decks. And they don't need to be basic Pokemon, so really you can like make a deck with just a bunch of stage 2 psychic Pokemon and shove them into your deck and just cheat them out with this guy. Pretty interesting. So I'm going to give him a 3. I don't really know how viable this would be. It's not good to have an entire deck revolve around one single card in GLC, but it is worth mentioning, so I'll give it a 3. Next I want to talk about Rabombi, and when I first read this card I thought it was broken, but I misread it, but I still want to talk about it. So stage 1, 70 HP, pretty low. But one colorless does 30 damage. During your next turn, if the defending Pokemon is knocked out, take 2 more prize cards, which is absolutely insane in GLC. That's half your prize cards in a single prize format. So if you can make this work, like maybe try and pair it with some retreating denial things. You can trap something in the active, use this, and then knock it out the next turn. Pretty combo-y, but I think this card has a bunch of potential if you can make it work. So I'm gonna give it a 4 because taking 3 prize cards with 1 attack is just so great. Let's talk about Screamtail. This is a 1, just not good at all. Fluttermane, if it's in the active spot, your opponent's active Pokemon has no abilities, and then its Hex Hurl does for 3 colorless does 90 damage, and you put 2 damage counters on your opponent's bench Pokemon in any way you like. The attack is okay, it's not very good, and its ability is terrible when you can just play Wobbuffet, which is just 1,000 times better. So I'm gonna give Fluttermane a 2. Then there are 2 Iron Valiants. This first one, for 1 colorless, does 20 to the active and 20 to something on the bench, which is okay for chip damage, like first turn of the game. And then for 3 energy does 120 and it can't attack the next turn. It's pretty basic. I'd probably give this one a 2, maybe a 3. I think this next one is a little better. Where for 1 energy you look at the top 4 cards and put them back in any order. I guess this is great if you are in top deck mode. But then Majestic Sword for 3 Psychic does 100, but if you played a future supporter card from your hand, this does 100 more, so 200 is a very great number. So I'm going to give this one a 3, a solid 3, if you want to play with future supporters, and we're going to talk about a couple of them more here in a bit. But there are a couple decent future supporters, so you could make this one work. And that is it for Psychic. So now let's talk about Relicanth, which is interesting because it has an ability where your evolved Pokemon can use attacks of its previous evolutions. It's worth mentioning, just you could have some interesting attacks with this, but I'm gonna give it a 2 for now because it is pretty situational, so. But does have potential. After that, we are going to talk about let's see, Lycanroc for 120. For 1 energy does 50, and then you get to attach 2 basic fighting energy cards from your discard to your bench in any way that you like. So actually a pretty decent energy acceleration, and fighting has a lot of ways to boost their numbers with like strong energy and muscle band and stuff, so you could actually raise these numbers pretty easily. So I'm gonna give this a 2, maybe a 3. It is situational, but pretty solid energy acceleration for fighting. So then there are 2 Great Tusks. This first one is actually pretty decent, I think. For 3 energy, it does 80, but if your bench Pokemon have any damage counters on them, which they will in fighting, most likely, this attack does 80 more, so it's doing 160. So I'm going to give this a 3, pretty solid. And then there's this other Great Tusk, the mill one, which you could make work in a mill deck, actually, I think. I'll give this one a 2. But it does have potential if you want to do an ancient / mill sort of deck, which I think fighting might be one of the best mill options for GLC. So then there's this Sandy Shocks. For 1 energy, it does 20, and if you have 3 or more energy in play, this does 70 more. But it is not affected by weakness, so you're doing 90 for 1, which is okay, I guess. But very situational still, not super high numbers, so I'm gonna give this one a 2. Alright, into Dark. I wanted to talk about Arbok, which is a pretty decent option for your poison-based Dark decks. For 1 energy, your opponent's active Pokemon is burned, confused, and poisoned, so just a guarantee all 3 for 1 energy, so that's pretty decent for you poison lovers. So I'm gonna give that a 3 for your poison decks. Next is just Roaring Moon left on the Dark list, which is a 1 because you have to. It does, for 2 energy, does 70 plus 10 more for each ancient card in your discard pile, and that's way too slow and way too situational. So it's just gonna be a 1. Alright, here we go. Now into Steel, or Metal. And the moment we've been waiting for, Matang. So Stage 1 has an ability. Once during your turn, you may look at the top 4 cards of your deck and attach any number of basic metal energy cards you find there to your Pokemon in any way that you like. Shuffle the other cards and put them at the bottom of your deck. This acceleration is ridiculous. This is going in every single Steel deck. It makes it way more faster. You can have these big, bulky metal Pokemon with expensive attacks become way more reasonable to pull off with this guy. Between him and Bronzong accelerating your energy, this guy is so good. It boosts metal so much, so this is getting a 5, absolutely. You probably don't even want to play a Metagross with Matang, but if you really wanted to, there's this new Metagross, which is a decent attacker. It's pretty beefy with 180 HP. For 1 energy does 60, and next turn it does 120. And then for 4 energy, which you can power it up with Matang if you really wanted to, 200, and then you discard 2 energy from this Pokemon, which is knocking out a lot of things. But so I'm gonna give this a 3, but I think you should just play Matang by itself because it is just that good. We'll talk about Iron Treads, which has an ability where if it has a future boost energy capsule attached, it is a fighting and a metal attack, or metal and fighting type. And then for 2 energy, it does 60, and you move an energy from this Pokemon to one of your bench Pokemon. So if you have a future boost capsule attached, you're doing 80, and you move an energy. You only really want to play this if you're trying to cover multiple weaknesses and then you're doing 160 if you're hitting the right weakness, but I still think this is just too weak, so I'm gonna give it a 2, just too situational. Alright, into Dragon, which there are no good dragons this set like the last one either, but spoiler alert, shout out to Zach, Dragon is getting a phenomenal buff next set, so look out for that. But first up, Koraidon. For 2 energy, does 30 times the amount of ancient Pokemon in play. In Dragon, this is not happening. He's like the only ancient dragon type, so just not good. And then for 3 energy, you're doing 130. There's just way better attackers who are doing more damage for cheaper. So this is a 1. And then Miraidon, 1 energy does 40 damage, and you search for 2 basic energy and attach them to your future Pokemon in any way that you like, which would be a great attack if there were any other future dragons, which there isn't. And then for 3 energy, you're doing 160, but you're hitting that same number with other things for less. So this one is better than the Koraidon, but I'm still going to give it a 1. Unfortunately for Dragon, just wait for next set, and it'll just be 1,000 times better. Alright, next I want to talk about Noctile, which Stage 1 does 70 damage for 2 energy, or 1 with a double colorless and such. And you may search your deck for up to 2 cards and put them into your hand, which is pretty great. So you can get this off turn 2, doing 70, maybe 90, maybe 110 with powerful energy and a muscle band. Like, pretty great numbers, and you get to search for 2 cards. That's pretty great. So I'm going to give Noctile a 3. Then I do want to point out this Pidove. If you were playing the Pidove line, this is by far the best Pidove to play. When it has 30 HP or less, you can just search for an Unfezant and put it onto this Pidove, so you just get to skip the evolution line. Unfortunately, there are not like any good Pidove or Unfezants. Like this one is just not worth playing this whole thing. So unfortunately, it doesn't really matter, but it is something to note if there is a better Unfezant that comes out in the future. Next is this Chinchino, which does 70 damage for 2 colorless, but it does 70 for each special energy attached to this Pokemon, which in colorless you're only playing special energy, so you can actually hit pretty decent numbers with this. So I'm gonna give this a 3, a pretty solid attacker for cheap. We have this Drampa, which does 100 for 3 colorless. If all of your bench Pokemon have at least 1 damage counter on them, this does 120 more. So 3 energy for 220 is pretty great on a basic, especially colorless, where you can mitigate some of that cost. But getting 1 damage counter on each of your colorless Pokemon, I don't know how realistic that is. I don't know if there are easy options for that, so I'm going to give Drampa a 2. Maybe if there's an easy way to spread damage on your own guys, like fighting does, then this would go up. But next up we have Iron Julius, Jugulus, where it has an ability if this Pokemon is in the active spot and is damaged by an attack from your opponent's active Pokemon, you get to put 3 damage counters on it. And then for 3 colorless does 110. I think the other Iron Julius is better, so I would probably just give this a 2. So And that is it for our Pokemon. And now we're going to get into the trainers. First up is Bianca's Devotion, which I gotta get my notes. Okay. Which supporter, heal all damage from one of your Pokemon that has 30 HP or less remaining. I am going to give this a 2. This is way too situational. Boxed Order is an item. Search your deck for up to 2 item cards, reveal them, and put them into your hand, then shuffle your deck. Your turn ends. I guess this is pretty good going first, but probably not warrant like playing after that. So, but pretty great. Actually, I take that back. I think this is a 3. It's really good if you're really not doing anything that turn anyways, so you can just play it and just search for whatever you want with items. So 3 as a solid option. Okay, here we go. Buddy Poffin. Item card that you search your deck for up to 2 basic Pokemon with 70 HP or less and put them onto your bench, then shuffle your deck. So this is a more restrictive VIP pass, but you get to play this at any turn on any turn you want, not just the first turn. And you can play this and VIP pass. This card is ridiculous for setting up. I think this goes in basically every single deck. So I'm giving this a 5 for sure. That you definitely need one of these in like every one of your decks. Next up is Cypher Maniac's Code Breaking, which you search your deck for 2 cards, shuffle your deck, then put those cards on top in any order. It's a reprint of Marshmallow, which is a really solid card, especially if you have Pokemon that draw you cards from the top. So I'm going to give this a 4, just a really solid option. And you might be able to play this along with Mallow because it's a future card, but I could be wrong, so don't quote me on that. Next up is Airy. Your opponent reveals their hand and you discard up to 2 item cards you find there. I'm going to give this a 2, just too situational. I guess if you want to slow your opponent down, you can play this. But Explorer's Guidance, Ancient Supporter, look at the top 6 cards of your deck and put 2 of them into your hand, discard the other cards. A little bit like Colress's Experiment in a way. I'm going to give this a 2. Discarding 4 cards is really brutal in a singleton format, so yeah, I'm going to give this a 2. New Stadium, Full Metal Lab, where metal Pokemon take 30 less damage from attacks from the opponent's Pokemon. Really solid stadium for metal types. I'm going to give this a 4. This paired with other damage reduction that still metal has is just so great. So Hand Trimmer, each player discards cards from their hand until there's 5. Your opponent discards first. This is alright as an item if you want a little bit of hand disruption, but a little situational, so I'm gonna give this a 2 plus, because you have to play your hand down if you don't want to hurt yourself. So a 2 for Hand Trimmer. Heavy Baton is a new tool where if the Pokemon this card is attached to has a retreat cost of exactly 4, if it's in the active spot and is knocked out from an attack, from damage, that's important, move up to 3 basic energy cards from that Pokemon and put them onto your bench Pokemon in any way that you like. This is very specific. We already have Wishful Baton, which is way less restrictive, so I'm gonna give this a 2. Very situational. Next up is Morty's Conviction Supporter. You can only use this if you discard another card, draw a card for each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. So at max, this is discard a card and draw 5. Which is okay, I guess, but I still think there are better options, so I'm gonna give this a 2. Here's your Perilous Jungle Stadium for you poison lovers. During Pokemon checkup, put 2 more damage counters on each poisoned non-dark Pokemon. So, really great stadium for your poison decks. So I will give this a... where did I have this? I don't know where I had this, but I'll give it a 4 for poison decks. Rescue board. The retreat cost of this Pokemon is 1 less. If it has 30 HP or less, it has no retreat cost. This is pretty situational, so I'm going to give this a 2, maybe even a 1 when we just have a skateboard, which is just better, and U-turn board for that matter. Salvatore. Search your deck for a card that has no abilities and evolves from one of your Pokemon, and put it onto that Pokemon to evolve it. You can use this card on a Pokemon you put down when you were setting up to play, or on a Pokemon that was put into play this turn. So pretty decent. It's like Wally essentially, but more restrictive. I'm gonna probably give this a 2. Situational. Maybe even a 1, because if it requires no abilities, that is very restrictive. So, and then we have 1 new energy to talk about, Mist Energy. As long as this card is attached to a Pokemon, it provides 1 colorless energy. Prevent all effects of attacks used by your opponent's Pokemon done to this Pokemon it is attached to. So this does block damage counters and effects like poison, paralysis, stuff like that. So a decent option if you're coming up against that stuff a lot. So I'll give this a 3. And I think that concludes every card I wanted to talk about. So let's go and talk about my rankings of all the types. Last time I dropped colorless from S tier down to A, and I very much shouldn't have done that. Colorless is by far the best type in the game, without question, even after the ban of the Fossil Labs. It is just all gas, so consistent, and just hits like a truck consistently. So definitely S. I still put Dark, Lightning, and Psychic in S tier as well. Just have Dark and Lightning are just so aggressive, take multiple prizes consistently, and Psychic just has so much going for it. I have Metal all the way up in A now because of Metang. This deck is just going to be everywhere. It's going to be so good now. Water and Grass I have stay the same. In B, I have Dragon, Fire, and Fighting, which are about the same, I think. They just don't have nearly as much support as these other types, so that's where I'm having them. And then, of course, Fairy is in C at the very bottom. And that is going to do it for Temporal Forces. Let me know down in the comments if you agree or disagree with any of these. If there's a card I didn't talk about that you wanted me to, then ask me in the comments and I will answer it there. If you disagree with my type rankings, then you can also mention that in the comments. If you just want to yell at me and tell me that I'm an idiot, you can do that as well. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next one.